Single teenage parenthood and the financial challenges.
I'm pregnant. What do I tell my mom and my dad? What do I do with all the dreams that I had? This is horrible. I'm so stressed out. Do I keep it, give it up, abort it? I have so much doubt. What if I keep it and see this through? How do I support myself and support it too? No money for food, for clothes, or for daycare. What kind of life are we going to share? No time for friends or even for school. I'm only 15. This feels so cruel.
Teen pregnancy is defined by the American Pregnancy Association as a pregnancy that occurs for a woman under the age of 20. 3 out of 10 teenage American girls will get pregnant at least once before the age of 20. That is nearly 750,000 teen pregnancies every year. Next slide, please. The long-term consequences of teen pregnancy include lower educational achievement for the parents, possible medical complications for both mother and child, higher subsequent fertility, low labor force participation, reduced earnings, and statistically a lifetime of economic stress and opportunity. Although there are more types of birth control available now than ever, accessibility is for the economically advantaged. Next slide, please. Parenthood is the leading reason that teen girls drop out of school. More than 50% of teen mothers never graduate from high school. Less than 2% of teen moms earn a college degree by the age of 30. About 25% of teen moms have a second child within 24 months of their first baby. More than half of all mothers on welfare had their first child as a teenager. In fact, 2/3 of families were begun by a young unmarried girl are poor. Although abortion is currently legal in the state, it is highly debated social issue that emotes strong opinions and emotions that bring out religious and psychological objections. Next slide, please. Most teenage girls don't plan on getting pregnant. Often, teens don't get prenatal care soon enough, which leads to problems later on. Next slide, please.
The life stage we are looking at when we're discussing teenagers is adolescence. Adolescence is a time of major development and growth. Teenagers deal with an increase of sex hormones, a brain that hasn't fully developed impulse control. They can be very emotional, and they want to make others like them, including for many the opposite sex. This combination of factors can lead to many consequences, such as risky behaviors that can lead to pregnancy. Next slide, please. Once teens find out they are going to be parents, they have to deal with a lot of stressful situations. Some of those can be biological and/or financial. Pregnant teen girls face higher medical risk than other females. They can develop anemia, toxemia, or even lose their babies. The babies born to teen moms can also face biological issues. They can be born too early, they can be born too small, underweight, and they can have developmental delays. Another major risk of becoming a teen parent is the financial strain. This starts since the pregnancy begins and carries on throughout the child's life. Both the teen mom and dad may have to quit school. This can affect them financially for a very long time, if not for the rest of their lives. It will be difficult for them to find the employment they need to be able to support themselves as well as their child. Next slide, please. When teenagers become parents-to-be, they are, as mentioned earlier, under a lot of stress. They have to deal with making some pretty big decisions. And although they are cognitively becoming logical thinkers who can take into account the opinions of others, they may not be mature enough to make the wisest decisions. For some, this compiled with unsupported families and no financial means can lead them to become homeless. A small study conducted in 2018, combined with a national survey, showed that 10% of homeless girls ages 13 to 17 stated they were pregnant or were already mothers. And 3% of boys ages 13 to 17 said they were already fathers or their partners were pregnant at the time. Next slide, please.
Theoretical approaches to single teenage parenthood. According to Young, the conflict between introversion and extroversion starts in adolescence and typically does not come into balance until somewhere around middle adulthood. He defined extroversion as an individual's exploratory orientation to the world around them, such as navigating social norms, what is expected of an individual as guided by the cultural or moral values of family and friends and collective society. He defined introversion as an individual's exploratory orientation to their inner world. In other words, looking at things more subjectively and critically, guiding ourselves according to our own determined values. Teenage parents likely have to engage in more extroversion than would the typical teenager that does not bear the responsibility of a child. Having to raise a child is a huge undertaking for an adult, let alone a single teenage parent. There are various needs that a child has to be fed, clothed, nurtured, etc. A child's needs will bring on financial burden, which creates a demand for a parent to figure out how to provide those things. A teenager in this situation will be forced to learn more about the world around them and how things operate within their society to provide those needs for a child. In this regard, it could bring on an acceleration of development and movement towards transition to early adulthood. However, it could also bring on deficits depending on socioeconomic status, the availability of familial support, as well as their ability to access community resources. Erik Erikson's theory had a strong focus around the idea of formulating identity, where he introduced the question of who am I in relation to others. As we grow from childhood to adulthood, demands on us are impressed by societal norms. They change. Part of the developmental life course requires individuals to evolve to meet the demands from our social and environmental atmosphere. Erikson believed that it is critical to develop close, committed relationships with other people as we grow towards adulthood. He asserted that this benefits our emotional well-being. He introduced the conflict of intimacy versus isolation. The achievement of intimacy is made up of three components, those being interdependence, which is the degree of mutual dependence from one person to another in relationships, self-disclosure, which is the ability to freely and openly share personal and private information within relationships, and affection, a mutual sharing of fondness or warmth that individuals experience in close relationships. Erikson suggested that this process of conflict begins during adolescence and resolves it at the time of young adulthood. It is a time where individuals move from the exploratory phase of identity into the engagement of intimacy with other individuals. Those who resolve the conflict of intimacy versus isolation will achieve love and companionship. This process does not only have to do with the romantic relationships that we have, but also familial and social ones as well. Isolation is the result of never resolving the conflict of intimacy and can be brought on by many different social and environmental factors, such as abuse and neglect, lack of familial stability, physical and mental health challenges. Likewise, evidence suggests that teenage pregnancy is more likely to occur when an individual is lacking positive and supportive relationships, and additionally has been associated with low socioeconomic status, according to Smith et al. 2018. Lack of social supports will limit access to financial resources.
Single teenage parenthood through a cultural lens. The US has a history of maltreatment and racism, and it impacts all facets of everyday life. A system that tries to silence the voices and experiences of those they oppress, which is why it is important to think beyond dominant discourse. Although single teenage parenthood impacts both male and females, my focus is on single teen mom parenthood. Women are a historically oppressed population. Even today, we are still fighting for reproductive freedom, impacting on a larger scale women in poverty and women who identify as LGBTQ. For example, there are certain reproductive procedures that insurances will not cover if you're trying to conceive with a same-sex partner. When discussing single teenage mothers, it can be helpful to include a cultural lens. What does the conversation look like when we add additional layers of oppression like race? Historically, Blacks had higher teenage birth rates, but since the mid-1990s, Hispanics, specifically Hispanics born outside of the US, a specification that has been overlooked in research, have had the highest teenage birth rates. This is taken from a cohort study in 1997. A popular response to Hispanic teens having such high birth rates are factors like the influence of culture and religion, as traditionally religion plays a big role in Latin cultures. But what are other contributing factors that aren't discussed in dominant discourse? Why do Hispanics born outside of the US have the highest teenage birth rates? My social work lens takes me to social policy, specifically immigration policies. Immigration policies discriminate and target Latinos, directly impacting their daily lives. That includes limiting their access to healthcare, and in this case, impacting access to birth control. The reality is that Latinos who live in communities targeted by ICE may have to choose. Do I go to the clinic for birth control and risk the chance of being stopped and detained by an ICE officer? They might not even be immigrant themselves, but their parents might, in turn, putting their family in danger of deportation, all because they wanted to obtain birth control. The LatinaInstitute.org states that confusing and intimidating immigration regulations for households with the combination of citizens and non-citizens and lack of health insurance, another policy-driven factor, impact high Hispanic teen birth rates. This would support the idea that birth rates are disproportionate because white affluent girls are more likely to get reproductive services. It is easy to point out religion and culture and not have to talk about the discriminatory systems in place that directly impact the lives of those who are marginalized. Motherhood in general changes your life. It brings increased responsibility and stress, as now you are responsible for yourself and another human being. That is difficult no matter when you become a mother. When you add different layers, the stress tends to increase. For example, consider a teen mother of color living in a low-income neighborhood. She has a higher risk of not finishing school, not obtaining higher education, which will impact her ability to obtain a job that would allow for financial stability. Dependent on family structure, she may even be kicked out of her home, adding even more stress. Being a teen mother of color also comes with stigma and stereotypes. I can personally remember being pregnant at 18 and hearing the whispers of my neighbors, "I've seen that coming," or "what a shame, she ruined her life." It can take a toll on one's emotional and mental health. These are all things to consider the next time you come across a teen mom. Show kindness and empathy and always empower. In conclusion, as social workers, it is important that we not judge, that we not assume, and that we understand that every single person has their own story.